Some of the most unforgettable sci-fi films ever made weren't created with massive budgets or huge studio support. One of the smartest time travel movies ever put on screen was made for around $7,000. No famous actors, no expensive effects, just a programmer with a camera and an incredible idea. Somehow, that tiny project became a cult classic and even caught attention at Sundance. And the craziest part? That's only the beginning of this list. Every film here was made for under $500,000, yet many of them feel more creative and memorable than modern blockbusters costing hundreds of millions. Instead of relying on CGI and spectacle, these movies focused on atmosphere, originality, and concepts that stayed with audiences long after the credits rolled. Some were ignored when they first released, others slowly built cult followings over time, but all of them proved the same thing. Great science fiction doesn't need a giant budget, just a great idea. Let's get into it. Number 10. Death Race 2000, 1975. In the mid-1970s, producer Roger Corman was known for quickly turning popular Hollywood trends into cheaper, faster, and more chaotic independent films. When dystopian racing films started gaining attention around Rollerball, he responded by producing Death Race 2000 on a very small budget of about $300,000. The film, directed by Paul Bartel, imagined a future America where a cross-country car race had become a violent national spectacle, with drivers scoring points by hitting pedestrians. Instead of polished effects, the movie relied on real roads, improvised stunts, and heavily modified everyday cars to create its futuristic world. This raw, low-budget style actually became part of its charm. The cast included David Carradine as the masked racer Frankenstein, and a young Sylvester Stallone in one of his early roles as Machine Gun Joe, performing many of his own driving scenes due to limited stunt resources. The film leaned heavily into satire, mixing absurd violence with commentary on media, politics, and society's obsession with spectacle. Despite its tiny budget, the movie became a cult success, earning millions and later gaining even more popularity after Stallone's rise to fame in Rocky. Over time, it influenced later dystopian racing stories and games like Carmageddon, securing its place as a bold example of low-budget creativity with lasting impact. Number 9. The Brother from Another Planet, 1984. John Sayles began his career writing scripts for Roger Corman, working on low-budget genre films like Piranha and Alligator. But even early on, he wasn't interested in staying inside the limits of monster movies. By the time he earned a MacArthur Genius Grant in the early 1980s, he had already built a strong reputation in independent cinema. Instead of using that recognition in a conventional way, he invested part of it into a small science fiction project about an alien who crashes near Ellis Island and slowly makes his way into Harlem. The entire film was made on a modest budget of around $350,000. The film, The Brother from Another Planet, centers on a silent alien played by Joe Morton, a trained stage actor who would later appear in major projects like Terminator 2. His character never speaks a single word throughout the film. Instead, he navigates 1980s New York City quietly, able to interact with the world in unusual ways, including repairing broken machines simply by touch. Through this character, the film subtly reflects themes of displacement, immigration, and survival in an unfamiliar society, all without explicitly explaining its message. As the story unfolds, the alien moves through a version of New York filled with both hostility and unexpected compassion, while being hunted by two other extraterrestrial figures, played by John Sayles himself and a young David Strathairn. Several now famous actors, including Giancarlo Esposito and Fisher Stevens, also appear in early roles. Rather than relying on visual spectacle, the film uses its science fiction concept as a quiet metaphor for identity, belonging, and alienation in America. Made for a fraction of a typical studio budget, it still managed to earn several times its cost and became Sayles' first real commercial success, proving that science fiction could be deeply political, personal, and intimate at the same time. Number 8. Another Earth, 2011. Mike Cahill and Britt Marling created this film together as a deeply personal, ultra-low-budget collaboration where everyone involved had to do far more than their official roles. With a budget of only around $100,000, Another Earth was built almost entirely through resourcefulness rather than money. Marling not only co-wrote the story and starred in it, but also helped produce it, and handled many behind-the-scenes responsibilities simply because there was no budget for extra crew. To keep costs minimal, Cahill shot the entire film in and around New Haven, Connecticut, his hometown. Real locations were used throughout the film. His own childhood house became the main character's home, and even his bedroom was used directly on screen. The production relied heavily on friends and family as crew members, and in many cases, basic filmmaking tasks were handled informally. Marling herself even assisted with makeup for other actors between scenes, just to keep the shoot running. The story follows Rhoda, a young woman whose life is shattered after she causes a tragic car accident while distracted by the sudden appearance of a second Earth in the sky. After serving time in prison, she quietly reconnects with the man whose family she destroyed, hiding her identity from him as their fragile relationship slowly develops. At the same time, the presence of Earth 2 raises a haunting question. If another version of our world exists, did those people make the same choices or completely different ones? The science fiction element remains subtle throughout the film, always sitting in the background as an eerie, silent presence rather than dominating the narrative. The focus stays on guilt, redemption, and human connection. Despite its minimal budget and extremely small crew, the film gained major recognition after premiering at Sundance in 2011, where it won the Alfred P. Sloan Prize. Later distributed by Fox Searchlight, it earned nearly $2 million worldwide, an impressive return for a film made largely in a house with a handful of people and pure creative determination. Number 7. Monsters, 2010. At first glance, the idea behind Monsters sounds like something that would demand a massive Hollywood budget. A NASA probe carrying alien life crashes back to Earth in Mexico, triggering the spread of enormous tentacled creatures across the region. Large parts of the area become a militarized quarantine zone, and the story follows a photojournalist tasked with escorting his boss's daughter safely through this infected territory in hopes of reaching the United States. In reality, Gareth Edwards brought this ambitious concept to life on an estimated budget of around $500,000, or possibly even less. He traveled through Central America with just 2 unknown actors, minimal crew, no formal permits, and a lightweight camera setup worth only a few $1,000s. Much of the film was shot in real locations across Mexico, Guatemala, and Belize, where ordinary environments were transformed into a believable post-invasion landscape. Local people often became spontaneous extras, adding a natural realism that no set or staging could replicate. The most remarkable part of the production happened after filming ended. Edwards, who had a background in visual effects, personally created all of the film's 250-plus VFX shots himself from his home computer. Using accessible software, he carefully integrated massive alien creatures into real-world footage, frame by frame, over months of detailed post-production work. The result is a film that visually feels far more expensive and expansive than its budget would suggest. Despite its tiny scale and independent production process, Monsters went on to earn over $5 million worldwide, proving that imagination, technical skill, and patience can sometimes replace the need for a big studio machine. Number 6. Pi, 1998. Long before Pi brought him into international attention, Darren Aronofsky was just a young filmmaker in New York with no industry backing, trying to turn an unusual idea into reality. A stark, black-and-white psychological story about a brilliant mathematician who slowly becomes consumed by paranoia while searching for a hidden numerical code that he believes explains everything in existence. With almost no access to traditional funding, he and his producer raised money in an extremely simple but relentless way. By asking everyone they knew to contribute small amounts, around $100 at a time, gradually building a budget of roughly $60,000. Once production began, the film was shaped almost entirely by necessity. Most of the exterior scenes, especially those shot in busy New York locations like subways and crowded streets, were filmed quickly and without official permits, relying on instinct, speed, and minimal crew. The costumes were not designed by professionals, but assembled from thrift stores or borrowed directly from the actors' personal wardrobes. The film's intense, grainy black and white aesthetic wasn't just artistic choice. It was also practical, achieved using reversal film stock that was cheaper and matched the story's unsettling tone. When Pi premiered at Sundance in 1998, it immediately stood out and earned the directing award. signaling the arrival of a distinctive new voice in cinema. Despite its tiny budget, it went on to earn several $million in limited release, delivering extraordinary returns for its scale. More importantly, it launched Aronofsky's career and established him as a bold, uncompromising filmmaker who would go on to redefine modern psychological cinema. Number 5. Cube, 1997. Before making Cube, Vincenzo Natali was working quietly as a storyboard artist in a Canadian animation studio, trying, like many emerging filmmakers, to get a feature film off the ground. But instead of waiting for a traditional studio opportunity that never came, he decided to design a project that could survive with almost no resources at all. His solution was both simple and highly controlled: build an entire film around a single environment. The idea was a claustrophobic puzzle made of identical cube-shaped rooms, reused and relit in different ways to create the illusion of an endless, shifting structure. The film was developed through the Canadian Film Centre's first feature program, with a very small budget of about 350,000 Canadian dollars. Even within that limit, compromises had to be made. Originally planned, visual variations had to be reduced, and the physical set itself was constructed just large enough to be rotated, lit, and reused efficiently for every scene. The story follows 6 strangers who suddenly wake up inside this massive geometric maze with no memory of how they arrived there. They have no context, no instructions, and no clear escape. Some rooms are harmless, others are deadly traps, and survival depends entirely on logic, trust, and fear. There is no hidden mastermind revealed, no detailed explanation given, and no traditional resolution in the background. Only the pressure of trying to survive an environment that feels both mechanical and unknowable. Natali's inspiration came partly from classic minimalist storytelling, including the Twilight Zone episode, 5 Characters in Search of an Exit, and that sense of existential confusion defines the entire film. When Cube was released, it quickly gained recognition, winning Best Canadian First Feature at the Toronto International Film Festival. Internationally, it far exceeded expectations, becoming a cult success in multiple countries and earning several times its budget in revenue. Over time, it also helped shape an entire subgenre of escape room-style thrillers, proving how a single idea, executed with discipline and imagination, can outgrow its budget limitations and leave a lasting mark on cinema. Number 4. Night of the Living Dead, 1968. In 1968, George A. Romero was far from the horror icon he would later become. At the time, he was simply a commercial filmmaker in Pittsburgh, creating industrial films and local television advertisements with a small circle of collaborators. Instead of waiting for studio backing, he and his friends formed a modest independent company called Image 10 and collectively raised around $114,000 to attempt something far more ambitious, a feature-length horror film made entirely outside the traditional system. With no major actors, no studio infrastructure, and almost no special effects budget, the production relied entirely on creativity and improvisation. They filmed in a deserted farmhouse that was already scheduled for demolition, allowing the environment itself to become part of the storytelling. Practical solutions replaced expensive effects. Blood was recreated using simple syrup, while some of the gruesome visuals used real butcher shop materials contributed by one of the producers. The zombie makeup evolved organically during production, starting from basic paint and gradually becoming more detailed as the team refined their approach on set. One of the most significant creative choices was casting Dwayne Jones in the lead role. At the time, having a black actor portrayed as the central hero in a predominantly white cast was highly unusual in American cinema. Romero later explained that the decision was based purely on performance. Jones delivered the strongest audition and earned the role. The film, Night of the Living Dead, premiered in Pittsburgh and immediately sparked controversy due to its intense violence and unsettling tone. Critics were divided, but audiences were captivated, and word of mouth quickly turned it into a major success. Made on a modest budget, it ultimately earned tens of millions worldwide, becoming one of the most profitable independent films of its era. Beyond its financial success, its cultural impact was even greater. It redefined the modern zombie, transforming it from folklore-inspired myth into the now familiar image of relentless flesh-eating reanimated corpses, a concept that continues to shape films, television, and games to this day. Number 3. Coherence, 2013. Most films begin with a polished, fully written script, but Coherence started in a completely different way, with a secret. Director James Ward Burkett didn't share the full story with his cast at any point during production. Instead of a traditional screenplay, he built a carefully designed narrative framework in his own mind, a set of rules and outcomes that guided everything, while the actors were left to experience the story without ever seeing the full picture. To make the film, Burkett invited a group of actor friends to a house and presented the project as an experiment rather than a conventional shoot. Over the course of 5 nights, each actor received private instructions written on notes, telling them what to say, do, or hide from others in specific moments. No one knew what instructions the others were given, and no one understood the complete storyline unfolding around them. Much of the tension, confusion, and emotional instability seen on screen comes directly from that uncertainty. The entire production was made on a tiny budget of around $50,000. The story takes place during a single dinner party, where 8 friends gather on the night a comet passes unusually close to Earth. At first, everything feels normal, but soon, strange disturbances begin. Power failures spread across the neighborhood, and reality itself starts to feel unstable. The situation escalates when they discover another house nearby that is exactly identical to theirs, filled with versions of themselves behaving in slightly different ways. What follows is a psychological collapse into shifting realities, exploring ideas tied to quantum theory, alternate timelines, and the unsettling question of whether identity remains the same under different circumstances. Filmed almost entirely inside a real home, using handheld cameras and improvised performances, the movie relies on spontaneity rather than controlled staging. Many of its most intense moments were not scripted in the traditional sense, but discovered during filming. After its release, Coherence quietly built a strong reputation, earning an 89% rating on Rotten Tomatoes and spreading largely through word of mouth and streaming platforms. With its minimal budget and maximum psychological impact, it became a reminder that sometimes the most disturbing science fiction doesn't rely on special effects, just a dinner table, a handful of people, and one impossible reality-breaking question. Number 2. Mad Max, 1979. Before becoming a legendary filmmaker, George Miller was working in a Melbourne emergency room, treating victims of real road accidents. While dealing daily with the aftermath of high-speed crashes and human trauma, he carried a creative idea he couldn't ignore, a vision of a collapsing society where roads become battlegrounds and fuel becomes more valuable than life itself. With almost no formal filmmaking background and only a single short film experience, he decided to turn that vision into reality. The result was Mad Max, made on a very small budget of around 350,000 Australian dollars. To make it work, Miller used whatever was available rather than relying on expensive production design. The vast Australian outback naturally became the film's wasteland setting, requiring almost no artificial construction. For the chaotic biker gang sequences, real motorcycle club members were used as extras, bringing an unpredictable intensity that couldn't be staged or rehearsed in a conventional way. Many of the stunts and crashes were performed practically, giving the film a raw, dangerous energy that feels authentic even today. The lead role went to a young, then unknown Mel Gibson, whose involvement came at a very low cost, helping the production stay within its tight budget. Instead of relying on money or technology, Miller focused on precision, timing, and controlled chaos, skills influenced by his medical background. Every chase sequence and collision was carefully designed, making the film feel far larger and more explosive than its resources would suggest. Despite its modest beginnings, Mad Max went on to earn massive global success, generating around $100 million worldwide and becoming one of the most profitable independent films of its era. Its influence eventually expanded into a long-running franchise, including later entries like Mad Max, Fury Road, shaping modern action cinema for decades. Number 1. Primer, 2004. Shane Carruth was a software engineer from Dallas with no film school background and no industry connections when he decided to make his first feature film in 2004 with just $7,000. On that extremely limited budget, he took on almost every role himself, writing, directing, producing, acting, editing, and even composing the score, while working with a tiny crew of about 5 people. Most of the cast was made up of friends and family, simply because there was no budget to hire professional actors, and nearly every dollar went into buying Super 16mm film stock, forcing an intense level of planning where almost every shot had to count. The film, Primer, was shot in ordinary locations around suburban Dallas: garages, parking lots, and storage units, with no visual effects, no futuristic design, and no cinematic shortcuts. It tells the story of 2 engineers who accidentally discover time travel inside a garage, and as they attempt to control it, their lives slowly spiral into confusion and paranoia. The dialogue is filled with real technical and engineering terminology, delivered without simplification, demanding full attention from the viewer and refusing to explain itself in an easy or conventional way. Carruth worked with an extremely tight shooting ratio, capturing only what was necessary with almost no extra footage, which resulted in roughly 80 minutes of usable material that became a 78-minute final cut. When Primer premiered at Sundance, it surprisingly won the Grand Jury Prize, standing out even among films with much larger budgets and full production teams. It later went on to earn millions worldwide and developed a reputation as one of the most complex and debated time travel films ever made, with viewers still constructing detailed explanations to understand its timeline. And that's the story behind how some of the most unforgettable sci-fi films were created far away from big studios, in garages, small houses, empty roads, and with almost no money but full creative commitment. Each of these films proved that limitation can become strength when imagination takes control, turning tiny budgets into bold ideas that reach far beyond what anyone expected. From experimental time travel stories to alien invasions and collapsing realities, they all share one thing in common. They were built by people who refused to wait for permission. And maybe that's the real takeaway, that great stories don't always need massive resources. They just need the courage to exist.